Hi again, and welcome to another review of two stories that are considered very popular around the world. The first review is from the novel The Great Gatsby, which was written by Scott Fitzgerald. Set in what was called the Jazz Age, a term popularized by Fitzgerald, or the Roaring Twenties, The Great Gatsby vividly captures its historical moment. The economic boom of post-war America, the new jazz music, the free-flowing illegal liquor. Such criminal enterprises are the source of Gatsby's income and finance his incredible parties, which are probably based on parties Fitzgerald himself attended when he lived on Long Island in the early 1920s. Nick Carraway, a young man from Minnesota, moves to New York in the summer of 1922 to learn about the bond business. He rents a house in the West Egg district of Long Island, a wealthy but unfashionable area populated by the new rich, a group who have made their fortunes too recently to have established social connections and who are prone to garish displays of wealth. Nick's next-door neighbor in West Egg is a mysterious man named Jake Gatsby, who lives in an enormous Gothic mansion and throws extravagant parties every Saturday night. Nick drives out to East Egg one evening for dinner with his cousin, Daisy Buchanan, and her husband, Tom, an erstwhile classmate of Nick's at jail. Daisy and Tom introduce Nick to Jordan Baker, a beautiful, cynical young woman with whom Nick begins a romantic relationship. Nick also learns a bit about Daisy and Tom's marriage. Jordan tells him that Tom has a lover, Myrtle Wilson, who lives in the Valley of Ashes, a great industrial dumping ground between West Egg and New York City. Not long after this revelation, Nick travels to New York City with Tom and Myrtle. At a vulgar, gaudy party in the apartment that Tom keeps for the fair, Myrtle begins to taunt Tom about Daisy, and Tom responds by breaking her nose. As the summer progresses, Nick eventually garners an invitation to one of Gatsby's legendary parties. He encounters Jordan Baker at the party, and they meet Gatsby himself, a surprisingly young man who affects an English accent, has a remarkable smile, and calls everyone old sport. Gatsby asks to speak to Jordan alone, and through her, Nick later learns more about his mysterious neighbor. He spends many nights staring at the green light at the end of the dock across the bay from his mansion. Gatsby's extravagant lifestyle and wild parties are simply an attempt to impress Daisy. He now wants Nick to arrange an encounter with Daisy, but he's afraid that she will refuse to see him if he knows that he still loves her. Nick invites Daisy to have a tea at his house without telling her that Gatsby will also be there. After an initially awkward gathering, Gatsby and Daisy reestablish their connection. They love rekindled and they begin an affair. After a short time, Tom grows increasingly suspicious of his wife's relationship with Gatsby. At a luncheon at the Buchanan's house, Gatsby stares at Daisy with such undisguised passion that Tom realizes Gatsby is in love with her. Though Tom is himself involved in an affair, he is deeply outraged by the thought that his wife could be unfaithful to him. He forces the group to drive into New York City, where he confronts Gatsby in a suite at the Plaza Hotel. Tom asserts that he and Daisy have a story that Gatsby could never understand, and he announces to his wife that Gatsby is a criminal, because his fortune comes from bottling alcohol and other illegal activities. Daisy realizes that her allegiance is to Tom, and he contemptuously sends her back to a stake with Gatsby, attempting to prove that Gatsby cannot hurt him. When Nick, Jordan, and Tom drive through the Valley of Ashes, however, they discover that Gatsby's car has struck and killed Myrtle, Tom's lover. They rush back to Long Island, when Nick learns from Gatsby that Daisy was driving the car when it struck Myrtle, but that Gatsby intends to take the blame. The next day, Tom tells Myrtle's husband, George, that Gatsby was the driver of the car. George, who has lived to the conclusion that the driver of the car, that Kim Milton must have been her lover, finds Gatsby in the pool at his mansion and shoots him dead. He then fatally shoots himself. Nick stages a small funeral for Gatsby, ends his relationship with Jordan, and moves back to the Midwest to escape the disgust he feels for the people surrounding Gatsby's life and for the emptiness and moral decay of life among the wealthy on the East Coast. Though Gatsby's power to transform his dreams into reality is what makes him great, Nick reflects that the era of dreaming, both Gatsby's dream and the American dream, is over. The characters of the novel are Nick Carraway, Jake Gatsby, Tom and Daisy Buchanan, Myrtle and George Wilson, and Jordan Bay. Manhattan is portrayed as a melting pot where diversity of social classes, races, and backgrounds is par for the course, and where unusual people don't really stand out. There is also East Egg, which is the place for the old money crowd, people whose wealth is inherited and who have been the upper crust of society for generations. In contrast, West Egg is for the nouveau riche, self-made people who have become rich recently and who were originally born into working or middle-class families. Located in West Egg, Gatsby's mansion is quite the spectacle. His house is a reproduction of French chateau. This is ridiculous, both because this French design is out of place in America, and also because it is a visible brand new building trying to replicate something that would be centuries old. Fabulous Gothic style manse located on Long Island's North Shore, stunning 22,000 square interior, 8 bedrooms, 8 baths, perfect for stay-over guests over wild weekend parties. 4-car garage comes with vintage 1920s yellow roadster. The mansion contains a multitude of different rooms, imitating the most prestigious of European historical styles. At one of Gatsby's legendary parties, Nick and his friend Jordan take a look around. On a chance, we tried an important-looking door and walked into a high Gothic library, paneled with carved English oak, and probably transported complete from some ruin overseas. The centerpiece was a French manor eggshell sunken garden, with water terraces, edges, and patterns leading to the grand entrance. The American dream is the idea anyone can make it in America. For example, gain fame, fortune, and success through enough hard work and determination. So Jake Gatsby is an example of the dream. So the American dream claims that anyone, no matter their origin, can work hard and achieve upward mobility in the United States. The Great Gatsby questions this idea through the rise and fall of Jake Gatsby. From the outside, he appears to be proof of the American dream. He is a man of humble origins who accumulated vast wealth. However, Gatsby is miserable. His life is void of meaningful connection, and because of his humble background, he remains an outsider in the eyes of elite society. Monetary gain is possible, Fitzgerald suggests, but class mobility is not so simple, and wealth accumulation does not guarantee a good life. Quite frankly, I say that I fell in love with the story. I tend to get emotional when I think about its final, because I think the fact that Gatsby died in that way was not fair. You know, bad guys didn't receive what they deserved in the story. Also, I would say that Nick Carraway is saved, in some sense, from being a materialistic person. He had to face the truth about wealthy and classy people, especially from the American dream. Well, the second review is from the story The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle. The popularity of Sherlock Holmes was well established by the time Sir Arthur Conan Doyle put pen to paper to write The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle. This popularity has extended into the modern day, with this story being one of the most well-liked and memorable of the Sherlock Holmes short stories. The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle was first published in the Strand magazine in January 1892. Although it is often considered a Christmas story. After its publication, the first 12 short stories by Conan Doyle will be combined into The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, a book that was published in 1892. The story begins telling that Sherlock says to Watson that at 4 o'clock on Christmas, a man named Peterson was heading home when he saw a tall man get into an altercation with a few hooligans. The man ends up dropping his hat and a dead goose. Sherlock is sitting in front of his fire with the man's hat, as the men discuss ways to find the hat's owner. Sherlock deduces that the man is intellectual because the hat size is large. A man with so large a brain must have something in it. He also decides that the man has recently lost a fortune because his hat was expensive 3 years ago, but not in the best condition now. He also deduces that the man has recently had his hair cut and that he uses lime cream in his hair. He also deduces that his wife no longer loves him because the hat has not been brushed in a long time. While they are chatting, Peterson rushes in and tells Watson and Sherlock that the goose contains a stolen gem, a blue carbuncle, which is all over the news. A man named Horner has been fingered for the theft. Horner protests his innocence in the strongest terms, but no one believes him. They decide they need to find the mysterious man who is holding the dead goose in order to get to the bottom of the theft. They put ads in the newspapers saying they have the man's hat and he can get it back by contacting them. When the hat owner shows up, it turns out that he knows nothing about the gem. So the men decide to find out where the ghost's journey started. They end up talking to a goose salesman who is grumpy and not too interested in answering questions about the goose. Holmes tricks the salesman into revealing the goose origin by making a bet that the goose was raised in the country, despite the salesman insisting that the goose is from the city. The salesman takes out his ledger to prove Holmes wrong, and after pointing out the origin of the goose, Holmes gladly hands over the man's winnings. As they head off, they overhear a man who also sounds desperate to find the goose. Watson and Holmes follow the man and then confront him, saying that they can help him find out where the goose came from. It turns out that the man is James Ryder, the man who accused John Horner of stealing the gem. Holmes takes Ryder to his place and reveals that they have the gem, and that Ryder needs to fess up about what he knows. Ryder comes completely clean, explaining that he framed John Horner because he knew he had a criminal past, and it wouldn't take too much to convince the police he was guilty. And Ryder decided to jam the gem in a goose's throat in order to transport it without suspicion. Despite this plan, he ends up taking the wrong goose, which left the gem-jammed goose to be purchased by the man in the hat. Ryder begs Holmes to not get him in trouble. He sobs and says, "I myself a branded thief, without ever having touched the wealth for which I sold my character." Interestingly, Holmes simply kicks the man out without contacting the authorities. He tells Watson that the man will not testify against the man, and that he is too afraid to ever commit another crime. However, if they send him to the jail, it will make him a jailbird forever. Plus, Holmes explains, it is the season of forgiveness. Sherlock Holmes is the main character in the story. In appearance, Holmes is tall, over 6 feet and thin. He has black hair and grey eyes, thin lips, and a hawk-like nose. Holmes is scrupulously clean and is always dressed neatly. Although he has never exercised for the fun of it, he is always fit and ready for action. According to his personality, Holmes is a very clever and observant man because of his performance on this mystery. His choices are reflected upon the crime and the large array of evidence that is given. Holmes is very conscious that there will definitely be a falsely accused person because there are still many missing factors. Holmes is motivated by the simple way of reputation. He will be more frequently called up if he were an extremely experienced detective. Holmes is changed in this chapter by his reaction to the truth of the crime. When he sees James Ryder confess and run away sobbing, he reacts in a more subtle manner by saying that he'll let it go for now. From all of his characteristics, he's a new person now because he has experienced some more complex mysteries. Analyzing this information, Holmes is observant, clever, easygoing, and experienced. Another of Holmes' specialties is his wonderful disguises, from groom to priest, clergyman to opium smoker, all of which have been much needed to gain information or as a way to escape from the criminals. He's a music lover who attends concerts and operas, and is also a violinist. The characters in the novel are Watson, Sherlock Holmes, John Horner, Henry Baker, Countess of Monarch, and James Ryder. The very first clue about the setting that we get from the narrator is when he explains how he stopped by Sherlock Holmes' house on December 27th to wish him a Merry Christmas. The apartment where Holmes and sometimes Watson live is absolutely filled with stuff. Gold snuff cases, scrapbooks of newspapers clippings, an encyclopedia, a shoe filled with tobacco, Holmes' chemical apparatus, a sofa, a pipe rack. The London Underground, hackney cabs, boats and trains appear over and over again. I think that the theme of the story is that stealing isn't good, and when you steal, there is a consequence. If you want my honest opinion, I say that the novel The Adventure of Sherlock Holmes is an amazing work of art. This story was one of my favorites in my childhood because I enjoyed very much stories about detectives, mystery, and situations that have to be solved. I know that some were complained because they want the stories not to be too short. But despite of this, of course, I recommend it to you to read the whole novel.